in the back!
FBI! Drop your weapon!
On New Year's Eve in Baltimore, people are celebrating and eagerly awaiting the new year. As the clock strikes midnight, cheers fill the air, but their joy quickly turns to fear when gunshots are heard and violence erupts across the city. Young police officer Eleanor Falco receives a call from a diner owner about a disruptive drunk. After discussing whether police intervention is necessary, she gets an emergency call about a shooting. She rushes to the scene to comfort the victim's wife and daughter before the investigation begins. Alongside another officer, she examines the area using a laser to trace the gunfire back to a specific apartment in a nearby building. Just as they prepare to investigate further, the flat unexpectedly explodes. They evacuate the building, and Eleanor instructs other officers to document the civilians leaving, hoping to capture the murder suspect's face. She then rushes upstairs through the smoke to find her colleagues forcing entry into the apartment, but loses consciousness near the window. Eleanor wakes up to a fellow officer placing an oxygen mask on her, and a paramedic soon takes over. She tries to appear okay, but the paramedic urges her to rest before going back downstairs. Meanwhile, Detective Jack Mackenzie, who assisted Eleanor earlier, updates the lead investigator about the flat owner, a Norwegian who received the apartment as a payment for a debt and has never been there. Suddenly, a nearby firework explodes, surprising the officers and leading the city council to cancel the remaining fireworks. Eleanor notices a police dog barking at a restroom, catching the team leader's attention. He orders the entire toilet to be removed as evidence and tells Eleanor to leave the scene. The next morning, Chief Jackson announces that Special Agent Lamarck from the FBI's Baltimore office will join the investigation. Lamarck addresses the officers, stating that the killer, responsible for 29 deaths, is a professional who has left no trace. He advises them not to rely on stereotypes of mass murderers. Eleanor quietly observes the speech while serving coffee. She overhears a disagreement between Lamarck and Jesse Capleton about closing the highway. Capleton seems more focused on the governor's image than catching the killer. In the pantry, Eleanor mentions to a fellow officer that the killer's actions appear more about seeking revenge than pure evil. Lamarck, overhearing, asks for her reasoning. She explains that the killer might stop when satisfied, but could kill again. Lamarck appreciates her insight and introduces himself. The next morning, Eleanor gets a call from Chief Jackson, telling her that Lamarck wants to meet at a cafe. She finds him arguing with Capleton, who insists on keeping the beaches open despite the threat. After Capleton leaves, Eleanor joins Lamarck for coffee, where he suggests she has a talent for understanding the killer. Jack arrives, and Lamarck invites both to join his team as liaisons between the police and the FBI. At the police station briefing, their only lead is to contact the painters who worked on the bombed flat 2 years ago. Krupp mentions the counterterrorism unit is running background checks at Grabber's request, frustrating Lamarck, who reminds everyone that he is in charge. A woman brings Lamarck a document from Capleton, agreeing not to impose a curfew, which he signs reluctantly.
Okay.
Marquand reveals that the weapon used was an antique M21 sniper rifle, complicating their investigation. Eleanor suggests looking into the arsenal keepers for leads, prompting Lamarck to assign the team to that task. On the way to the morgue, Eleanor notes that Lamarck seems troubled by other teams' involvement, but Jack explains that multiple teams often hinder cases. In the morgue, they are shocked by the number of victims. Lamarck asks for their thoughts on the killer, and they agree it's likely a man with military or high-level sports training. Eleanor adds that the killing seems spontaneous and lack a clear pattern. Lamarck believed the killer wasn't trying to cause suffering, as all victims were shot with a single bullet, indicating a desire to disrupt society. Their discussion is interrupted by a report that they have found the killer. They rush to the scene, where Agent Frank Grabber is leading the operation. He explains that a kid in the apartment building has locked himself in and threatened to kill anyone who tries to enter. Lamarck considers this a dangerous situation, especially since they don't know if the kid is armed. They watch as the team breaks down the door and the kid starts throwing objects before shattering a window.
What are you doing?
Lamarck is frustrated with Grabber and Capleton for their rash decision and their refusal to acknowledge it was a mistake. Back at the station, he and 2 officers begin questioning the painters who worked on the flat. One painter, Rodney Lang, brings his baby because his wife is at work. They ask each painter about their ties to the bombing and the killer, but none provide useful information since they worked on the flat years ago. Meanwhile, Eleanor observes the situation, and Lamarck eventually asks her to take the baby outside as it's distracting. Later, after receiving a lab report stating that the killer is a vegan, Lamarck confronts Eleanor, upset that she didn't bring the report to him directly. As she walks home, she apologizes for his outburst and invites her to dinner to discuss new evidence. Initially, she thinks he's flirting, but he clarifies that he's married. In the car, Lamarck expresses feeling constrained by Capleton's influence, which could jeopardize his job. He also mentions knowing about Eleanor's rejection from the FBI, emphasizing the scrutiny they face from both the FBI and the police. He presses her about her reasons for becoming a cop, her honesty during her FBI application, her lack of college education, and her personal struggles, leading her to break down and reveal her self-inflicted scars. She confesses to battling depression, and Lamarck encourages her to use her experiences to better understand the killer. Meanwhile, in a mall, a mysterious man steals clothes, washes himself in a public restroom sink, and collects leftover vegetables from cafeteria tables. When security guards confront him and ask him to open his bag, he refuses, insisting he just wants to go home.
I just want to go.
We'll let you go, we just need you to open that bag. Open the
The
bag.
man pulls out a gun and begins firing. Eleanor, who is at an antique gun store for the investigation, is summoned to the scene. She arrives at the security room to join others in attempting to see the man's face, but they find it impossible. Eleanor observes the man only taking vegetables from the table, which aligns with the lab report they received about the killer. They then witness him kill the guards and the woman who mocked him before he turns on the officers who arrive at the scene. Eleanor and Lamarck conclude that the killer prefers not to engage directly, but suggesting he may have come from a background of skilled shooters. The killer used grenades to take out the remaining officers chasing him. Outside the mall, Lamarck sees Capleton arriving by helicopter and quickly tells Eleanor and Jack to find the killer's shirt. The team then heads to a landfill where mall trash was dumped, searching carefully for the shirt. Meanwhile, at the station, Grabber and Capleton consider airing footage of the killer on a popular TV show in hopes of someone recognizing him. Lamarck thinks this is a bad idea, but his boss, Nathan Bowen, insists he must go along with it to keep his job. Just as Lamarck protests, Jack returns with the shirt they were looking for. The team looks over data from the arsenal keeper and receives a lab report indicating the killer may have had significant head trauma in the past. The mall footage airs live, and the host urges viewers to call in with any information. While many calls are unrelated, one person claims to be the killer and states he is part of a shadow army. The officers triangulate the caller's location and rush to apprehend him, although Lamarck and Eleanor doubt he is the real killer. The caller is at a corner store with his friends. To prepare for the operation, Jack, Marquand, and Eleanor evacuate the civilians. Eleanor struggles to persuade an elderly man to leave before the caller and his friends realize they are being targeted. A shootout ensues, resulting in the deaths of most of the men. One officer tases a man who later reveals that the call was just a prank and has no ties to the killer or a shadow army. The next day, Lamarck is questioned about the failed operation. He insists it wasn't his idea and that he opposed it, but as the operation's head, he bears the responsibility for its outcomes. The televised footage results in civilian casualties, prompting criticism of Eleanor's unsuccessful FBI assessment. Lamarck defends her, asserting her potential, but he still gets fired. He shares drinks with Eleanor and Jack, and, feeling guilty, Eleanor returns home, battling thoughts of self-harm. After some reflection, she visits Rodney, the painter, accusing him of outsourcing the painting job based on his income records. After being chastised by his wife, Rodney admits he hired an ex-convict named Dean, who claimed to have become a vegan after working at a slaughterhouse. They enlist a sketch artist to depict Dean's likeness and visit 3 local slaughterhouses, where a woman eventually identifies him as Dean Posse. Eleanor learns that Dean was bullied at the slaughterhouse, leading to a man's accidental death, which Dean was blamed for, resulting in a 2-year prison sentence. In the car, she discovers Dean's father was a shooting instructor, giving Dean access to antique guns, and that Dean suffered head trauma from a childhood gunshot. They go to Dean's mother's house, but don't have his contact info. Eleanor wants to call Jack for backup, but Lamarck advises against it. When they arrive, Mrs. Posse initially resists, but agrees to help when they mention capturing Dean alive. She explains that after a shooting accident involving Dean's father, he became a reclusive person, filled with anger. Eleanor notices a cabin nearby, but it's too late. Lamarck gets shot from there. In panic, she instructs Mrs. Posse to grab their guns and phones to show Dean they're trying to help. Mrs. Posse goes outside and threatens to shoot herself if Dean doesn't cooperate. Seeing this, Dean comes out with a rifle. He enters the house, puts away his rifle, and takes a handgun to talk with Eleanor. She tries to convince him that she can help him, as she also struggles. Dean eventually trusts her and asks her to shoot him when he falls asleep next to his mother, which she agrees to do. However, when Dean hears police sirens, he thinks Eleanor is betraying him. He ties her to a pole in the cabin and goes outside to shoot at the officers. Eleanor desperately tries to convince him to stop, eventually managing to hug him as the officers surround them. She promises to help if he surrenders, but when he detonates nearby bombs, she bites him, causing him to bleed. Dean escapes and aims his gun at her, but chooses to walk away. The police later find him weak and bleeding against a wall and shoot him multiple times. Meanwhile, Eleanor frees herself with Jack's help. Later, in Nathan Bowen's office, she is offered a document to keep the operation classified in exchange for a job as an intelligence analyst. She refuses, stating she won't remain silent about their failures. Capleton points out that her actions with Lamarck were illegal, causing her to reconsider. She requests a posthumous Medal of Valor for Lamarck, which Bowen agrees to do, and she insists on becoming a special agent instead of an analyst, which is accepted. The movie concludes with Eleanor shaking hands with Capleton before heading home, reflecting on Lamarck's words. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.